Hello guys, in this video we're going to talk about traces of what we can be regarded as shamanic practices among the Slavic people. In fact, I will most likely make several videos on the subject, so make sure you don't miss them. Now, we must be aware that, of course, we're not going to find real surviving shamanic practices among the Slavs, as these practices tend to be preserved by mostly non-European people. But we can certainly find certain aspects and mythological concepts of the Slavic culture which can be broadly regarded as shamanic. In this particular video, we're going to focus on two specific South Slavic dances which use drumming as a means of attaining a different state of being, and we're going to interpret them from a shamanic perspective. In order to understand this better, we must first understand what shamanism is. But before I go on and talk about it, I just want to inform you that during the past winter months, I have been writing several articles for a website for a new project which is called the United Homesteads. Now, the United Homesteads is basically this project which aims to promote a healthy and natural lifestyle, not only for ourselves but also for our descendants, and for a more self-sustainable future. It's a place where you can basically learn various useful skills and traditional methods of homestead maintenance, food preparation and preservation, gardening, and so forth. But there is also a section which is called lore, for which I write mostly, and the articles are related to our high festivals, such as their origin, ways to celebrate, and so forth. So yeah, if it sounds interesting to you, as it does to me, make sure that you check it out. I'm sure you'll find some useful things. And who knows, maybe you'll become a frequent visitor of the website. That being said, let's take a look at what shamanism basically is. Well, shamanism as a cultural phenomenon can be treated in two basic frameworks. In the narrower sense of the word, it refers to the people of Siberia, Central Asia, and Sami people of Northern Europe, while in the broader sense, it refers to similar phenomena observed today or in the past in most places of the world. The term shaman is originally used by the Evenki people that live in East Siberia, far east of Russia, northern China, and Mongolia. But today the term is commonly used for any member of an archaic society who, through some kind of mystical journey, mostly in the sky, encounters various beings such as ancestral spirits or deities, and performs healing rituals and initiatory rituals and so forth. So the shamanic journey is practiced by these people who are shamans, for various purposes and needs of the community or the individuals, such as we said, healing, contact with the dead, with the gods, with other natural spirits, and so forth. A condition for the realization of these functions is basically the ecstatic state of the shaman, which is realized through his inborn abilities or various movements, vocal, verbal, and dance performances, followed by music, rhythm, noises, and sometimes psychoactive substances. The journey of the shaman is usually made possible by three types of mediators, which are the cosmic tree or the cosmic pillar, the shaman's horse or reindeer or any other animal, and the shaman's drum. The frequent equating of these animals and even the replacement of their names are the best confirmation of the fact that they are objects with the same meaning and function. The symbolic identification of the drum, the wood, and the animals also functioned on a material level, so to speak, through the use of elements from the bodies of the creatures in the making of the drum. This refers to the wooden body of the drum and the drumsticks, as well as the skin stretched over them. The drum and drumsticks were made from sacred trees and were covered with the skin of sacred animals such as horse, elk, reindeer, bear, and so forth. The drum is perhaps the shaman's most important element because its rhythm forms the basis of all other actions included in the shamanic rite. This instrument is not treated as an ordinary object, but as a living companion of the shaman, in whose essence is incarnated the spirit of the creatures from which it is made. That is, the spirit of the sacred tree from which its body is made, a precisely deified tree identified with the mythical cosmic tree, and the spirit of the animal whose skin is stretched on it, usually identified with the totemic ancestor of the shaman and his community. Within the rite, the drum is literally considered a vehicle, such as a tree, a pole, or an animal, that enables the ascent, journey, transfer of the shaman from this world to the other world. The shamanic drum is often called a horse, a doe, or a deer, depending on the skin stretched over it. So, for example, among the Siberian Yakuts and Buryats, it's literally called the shaman's horse or the shaman's deer, while among the Mongols it's called the black deer. And the drumstick of certain drums was covered with deer or bear skin from the legs of the animals, which was for the rites related to the lower world, or from the forehead of the animals for the rites related to the upper world. On the other hand, we can observe this in the name of the Vedic cosmic tree, which is Asvata. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that rightly, but it means horse pillar or horse tree. And not only because of the fact that the sacrificial horse was tied to it, but also obviously because of their function as mediators, that is to say, carriers. Similarly to this, in the Norse mythology, for example, we have the cosmic tree Yggdrasil, meaning Odin's horse, and Odin is the deity which can, of course, access all realms of the cosmos by riding his horse. Unfortunately for us, we do not have any surviving archaeological evidence that drums were used by the early Slavic people, nor do we have any written sources about it. However, the fact that there is a common Slavic word for a drum stemming from a Proto-Slavic root indicates that this instrument was indeed known to our ancestors. It is practically impossible to preserve a drum for several thousand years, but a framed drum is one of the oldest instruments known to man, with countless varieties across the world. So it must have been known to our ancestors across Europe in various forms. Aside from this, we are certain that various, quote, drumming methods were known to many European people such as banging on metal or wooden objects, banging on shields, ringing cattle bells, and so forth, as a loud noise had the same apotropaic function among all ancient Europeans, regardless of how it was produced. From the surviving Slavic ethnographic evidence, the most significant examples of shamanic relics come to us from an area of the southern Slavs. Yet when we include a broader understanding of the mythology and folklore, we will see that the same concepts existed among all Slavs and most European people. The two rituals which we will explore are one dance from the western part of North Macedonia called Teshkoto, which means the difficult one, and the fire walking ritual from Bulgaria called Nestinarstvo, both of which are accompanied by a drum whose role is essential. The drum used in both cases is the same type. It's a drum which is widespread in the Balkans, in Serbia, North Macedonia, Bulgaria, and parts of Greece, but also certain other Oriental countries. In the existing literature, the prevailing opinion is that it is an instrument of Eastern origin, which was brought to the Balkans with the expansion of the Ottoman Empire. However, the artistic representations of this instrument, on some examples from medieval church frescoes in Macedonia, clearly indicate its presence on the Balkans at the very beginning of the 14th century, which is almost 100 years before the conquest of the Ottomans. So the supporters of the Eastern genesis of the drum relativize these facts by pointing at the presence of the Oriental cultural influences in the Balkans even before the political dominance of the Ottomans in these areas. In a sense, the Eastern Roman Empire, which we know as Byzantine Empire, would have been already influenced by Oriental cultures. In addition to these historical examples, we can mention several more medieval artistic representations of the drum that come from the wider Balkan area. In the first two cases, we have two graffiti drawings from the area of Madara in Bulgaria, which are engraved in stone basically, and are dated to the early Middle Ages. In one case, it is very obvious that it is a drum, perhaps exactly the same as the Balkan drum used today in these countries, which is indicated by its position on the player's body, the large drumstick and the smaller stick represented in the region of his left hand. The second example is more modest and not so reliable. We can assume that the figure in the right hand holds a frame drum that looks more like a tambourine, or what we today call a shaman drum, than to the Balkan drum. Some researchers suggest that both figures should be identified as shamans. In the first case, the depicted phallus on the drummer and the presence of another human figure lying next to him may indicate a process of healing by the shaman. The third case is from Herzegovina, and it is a shallow relief carved on a tombstone of the stečci type, which I've spoken about previously in my books. It shows a sitting figure holding a mallet or a drumstick in the right hand. Below it, at the player's feet, is an indeterminate object that could be identified as a drum, shown from the side. The special character of the drummer is emphasized by the elongated element that rises on his head. If it's not a drum, it has to be something else. Most people believe that it's a drum because what else could this figure be banging, right? With his hand. Maybe a stone? To the right, we can see three figures in dancing poses, which also emphasizes the possibility that he's actually a drummer. and with one hand placed on their waist and the other hand in the air. I believe that these examples are enough to show us that even if the type of drum was a result of Oriental influence, which we cannot be sure, the drumming culture was already rooted in the population. So let's continue to the dances. Teshkoto, or the difficult one, was until the middle of the 20th century played mainly in the area inhabited by the Miak tribe of modern-day North Macedonia. Interestingly, this tribal group is where I originate from my maternal side. It is a men's dance performed accompanied by drums and other blowing instruments. The dance starts with a semicircular movement of dancers in free movement, after which they hold hands and continue to dance through slow, emotional and tense movements, which they largely perform while standing on one leg, stepping only with the forefoot. The other leg is raised and bent at the knee, while constantly performing her exceptional slow movement in all directions and gradual descent to the ground, followed by gradually raising the other leg. Now, the culminating point of the dance is the ascension of the leader of the dance on the drum, where he continues to dance in the same way. After his descent to the ground, the slow rhythm is replaced by a faster one, followed by an appropriate change in the tempo of dancing, which now consists of quick steps, jumps, kneeling, rotation, and separation of the dancers from the dance. When we consider what was previously said about the shaman's drum, we can interpret the culminating point in an entirely new way. According to the sources, this culminating element was introduced into the dance with its standardization as a means of cultural preservation in the 1950s. However, the statements of some of the oldest drummers and dancers say that this culminating element was performed exclusively when the leader of the dance reached a very special emotional and ecstatic state, during which he climbed on the drum and danced. However, due to certain drums being too big to climb on, the drummers would kneel on the ground and the leader of the dance would climb on their backs instead and continue dancing on them. This is also a deeply symbolic act, because the musicians, and in particular the drummers, were represented and imagined as chthonic beings in the South Slavic mythology, and I will cover this in depth in the following video. For now, it is simply important to understand that this act, as the dancer stepping above a chthonic being, which in a way makes this act a cosmological image. The dancer, achieving a state of trance, transcends the chthonic realm and ascends to the sky. Several elements of this act suggest some sort of vertical movement of the first dancer and thus a certain intermediate relation with the shamanic upward journey. The dancer is mounted on the drum, and the fact that exactly the drum provides this separation from the earth points to the previously mentioned function of the shaman's drum, which is to separate the shaman from this world, that is to say the earth, and transfer him to that world, or the sky. So here the drum also acts as a vehicle. Furthermore, the dancer stands on one leg, which signifies the tendency to separate from the ground, and as such he slowly rises and descends, which also suggests some sort of leap or gradual separation from the ground. The position in which the leader of the dance appears is in fact identical to that of the Hindu god Shiva Nataraja, shown dancing in the circle of fire, symbolizing the eternal cycle of life and death. According to the interpretations of this posture, Shiva, standing on his right leg, gives abode to the weary soul struggling with the nooses of destruction. His left foot, which is raised, signifies the eternal liberation of the devoted souls from the circle of earthly life cycles. So Shiva represents the detachment from the earthly, from the chthonic and the ascension to the divine. Shiva is also accompanied by a drum which is called Damaru, also a symbol of creation and evolution, whose rhythmic vibrations represent the creative dance of the energies of the physical nature. The rhythm of the drum is essentially inseparable from the rhythm of the beating heart, which we can also see in the etymology. In the Slavic languages, the same word, biti, means to exist, to live, but also to beat and to strike, both of which are united in the beating heart when we are alive. Therefore, the identification between the rhythm of the drum and the heartbeat as a condition for the duration of life is very obvious. Like the leader of the dance, Shiva also steps on something which elevates him from the ground. This time it is not a drum, but the dwarf demon Mayalaka or Apasmara as the personification of ignorance and evil. To a more archaic cosmological level, deprived of the latter ethical valorizations, we could interpret this character simply as a personification of the lower spheres of the universe, the earth and the underworld, which serve as a support for the god and determine his macrocosmic dimensions and activities. And as we shall see in the following video, the drummer upon which the dancer sometimes climbed also had an original chthonic nature. While standing on the drum or the drummer, the dancer holds hands with the dancer next to him, and at that moment the rest also stand on one leg in a semicircular formation. But at some performances, the leg of some dancers is a little lower than the former, so that the last one is almost kneeling with one leg on the ground. By doing so, they form a gentle spiral that rises towards the drum and the leader of the dance, suggesting a gradual ascension, with the leader completely detaching himself from our world, of course, symbolically speaking. When we take into consideration that this act of ascension was originally performed only in moments of great spiritual arousal, it is safe to assume that the dance was originally performed with the purpose of attaining this state, or it is a later invention meant to preserve an understanding which was once present among people, but in a symbolic way. Within the South Slavic area, shamanism is the best explored in the Bulgarian culture. The base and occasion for this is the participation of Turkic populations, primarily the Proto-Bulgars, in the ethnogenesis of the modern Bulgarian people, realized mainly in the early Middle Ages. Based on this fact, a thesis is made according to which this ethnic component, which had shamanism as its dominant religious phenomenon, had to leave traces in the population. In addition to this, we have certain written documents and artifacts dating back to the Middle Ages. On the territory of Bulgaria, numerous medieval art, such as drawings, graffiti, depict human characters with certain shamanic features, such as specific costume and various other attributes. And as we have seen, some of them hold a drum in their hand. But it must be said that the shamanic component in science, often quite unjustifiably, is given as an exclusivity above all to Asians, and within that framework, especially to the people of the Turco-Altaic group. It is almost never taken into account that in the past, what we today call shamanic practices were also included in the Indo-European or pre-Indo-European populations of Europe. The Nestinarstvo ritual is primarily present in some parts of Bulgaria and Greece, and includes certain shamanic features such as a ritual trance of the performance, induced among other things from rhythmic music making, which allows the participants to walk barefoot on burning embers without being hurt. Today, this custom is incorporated into the Christian religious system, mainly the cult of Saint Constantine and Helena. It is believed that this rite, among other things, ensures greater fertility of the land throughout the year and prosperity in all domains of life. Another belief says that by doing so, the participants in the ritual sort of burn away all the sins of the people committed during the past year. It is especially important for us that a mandatory element of these rituals is the drum, accompanied by a bagpipe or other blowing instruments, whose constant rhythm is considered a key condition in the attainment of ecstasy. There are several similarities and forms of sacralization shared between the shaman's drum and that of this ritual. For example, in the cultic places of the Nestinari, who are the participants of the Bulgarian ritual, the old drums are carefully preserved despite them being defective, and they're treated as sacred objects. Some of them are hundreds of years old, and their donor and the time of donation is well remembered. They're treated as a kind of cult relics, and as such they stand in a special place within the sacred space, usually under the icons which in the past certainly represented images of ancestors or deities, because we know this to be a fact. In all Slavic lands, the icons were a later substitution of idols or other types of imagery which represented the deities or ancestors. The rite begins with the beating of the sacred drum, often by an old man. There are certain traces of the belief that the spirit of the sacrificed animals, whose skin was used to make the drum, were still present within it. In that sense, the drum would be regarded as the doublet of the sacred sacrificial animal. The drum is treated as a living being with autonomous behavior, or at least as an element through which some higher power manifests itself. So it is said that the drum beats by itself at night, and that he feels the presence of the saint and so forth. So we can obviously see that the drum was not treated as a ordinary object, but rather as a sacred object, very similar to how people who still practice shamanism treat their drums. According to some researchers, the Nestinarstvo ritual stems from the ancient Thracian people, but we cannot be certain in its origin. What we can be sure about when we observe these two examples is that the shamanic role of the drum and the music in general was certainly known to our ancestors, and it was certainly used in order to invoke these different states of mind for ritualistic purposes. That's all for this video. In the following video, we're going to explore the relationship between the drummer, the shaman, and the blacksmith, and how that manifests in the Slavic and broader European mythology. So if you enjoyed this video, consider supporting the channel by sharing, liking, and subscribing, and make sure you check out my books in the description below. Thank you very much for listening, and take care.